Saudi Arabia just sold oil to China for yuan, not dollars. Sounds like just another trade deal? This is an earthquake. The system that kept the American dollar on top of the global economy for 50 years is starting to crumble. And this is only the beginning. Today we're breaking down why the Saudi-China oil deal isn't just another headline. It's a signal that the global financial system is being rewritten, and it will affect everyone, from your wallet to the geopolitics of the next few decades. Here on Money System, we break down the real mechanics of money and power. Subscribe if you want to understand what's actually happening in the world economy. Let me take you back to 1971, August 15th. President Richard Nixon walks into the Oval Office and makes an announcement that will change the world forever. The United States is abandoning the gold standard. No more converting dollars to gold at $35 per ounce. The Bretton Woods system, which had governed global finance since World War II, is dead. Why did Nixon do this? Simple. America was running out of gold. The Vietnam War was draining the treasury. Social programs were expanding. And foreign countries, especially France under Charles de Gaulle, were demanding to exchange their dollars for American gold. The US had printed far more dollars than it had gold to back them. Something had to give. But here's the problem Nixon created. Without gold backing, what gave the dollar value? Just trust. And in the early 70s, trust was in short supply. Inflation hit double digits. Oil prices quadrupled during the Arab oil embargo of 1973. The dollar was in free fall. Foreign central banks were dumping American currency. The Soviet Union was waiting in the wings, ready to exploit American weakness. Washington was facing an existential crisis. They needed a new anchor for the dollar. Something that would force the world to keep using American currency even without gold backing. Enter Henry Kissinger. Nixon's Secretary of State was a master strategist. He understood that in the modern world, oil was more valuable than gold. Every country needed it. Every economy ran on it. And the Middle East had most of it. Kissinger flew to Saudi Arabia in 1974. The deal he struck with the Saudi royal family was elegantly simple, almost beautiful in its design. The Saudis would price all their oil sales exclusively in US dollars. Not gold, not marks, not yen, only dollars. In exchange, America would provide military protection, weapons, and political support to keep the House of Saud in power. But it went deeper than that. The agreement included a secret component that wasn't revealed until decades later. The Saudis would recycle their oil revenues back into US Treasury bonds. Essentially, they would lend their oil profits back to America, keeping US interest rates low and funding the American government. This was the birth of the petrodollar system, and it created a self-reinforcing cycle that would dominate global finance for the next 50 years. Here's how the mechanics worked, and pay attention because this is crucial. Japan wants to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, but they can't pay in yen. The Saudis only accept dollars, so Japan has to first go to currency markets and buy US dollars. To get those dollars, they sell yen and buy US Treasury bonds. Then they use those dollars to purchase Saudi oil. Now multiply that by every country on Earth. Germany, France, China, India, Brazil. Everyone needs oil. Everyone needs dollars first. This creates constant structural demand for the US currency. But it gets better for America. Those dollars that countries earn from selling goods to oil-producing nations, they don't disappear. They come back to the United States as investments. Oil exporters buy American real estate, stocks and bonds. The money circulates back. This gave the United States an extraordinary privilege. We could run massive trade deficits. We could finance wars in Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. We could bail out banks in 2008. We could print trillions during COVID. And the world would absorb it because they needed dollars for oil. Paul Volcker, former Federal Reserve Chairman, once said the petrodollar allowed America to live beyond its means for decades. We exported inflation to the rest of the world while maintaining prosperity at home. Think about what this meant in practice. When the US invaded Iraq in 2003, it cost over $2 trillion. Where did that money come from? Partially from countries that needed to hold dollars for oil purchases. In a twisted irony, some of those countries opposed the war, but still financed it indirectly through the petrodollar system. This wasn't just an economic arrangement. It was a geopolitical weapon more powerful than any aircraft carrier. Countries that stepped out of line could be cut off from dollar payments, which meant being cut off from oil, which meant economic collapse. This is why Saddam Hussein's decision to sell Iraqi oil for euros in 2000 was seen as such a threat in Washington. It wasn't just about Iraq, it was about the precedent. For 50 years this system seemed unbreakable. But empires don't fall overnight, they erode, and 3 major fractures started appearing in the Petrodollar foundation. But perfect systems don't exist. 3 critical cracks appeared, and each one would prove more dangerous than the last. Crack number 1, the rise of China and the fundamental shift in global oil consumption. In 1990, China consumed about 2 million barrels of oil per day. The United States consumed 17 million. Fast forward to 2023. China now consumes over 15 million barrels daily, making it the world's largest oil importer. America? Still around 20 million, but we're producing most of it ourselves now. This shift is staggering when you really think about it. For decades, the petrodollar worked because America and Europe were the primary oil consumers. They needed Middle Eastern oil, so they needed dollars. But now, the center of gravity has moved east. Beijing started asking uncomfortable questions around 2010. Chinese officials would sit in meetings and wonder, why are we converting yuan into dollars, then buying oil? Then the Saudis convert those dollars back into yuan to buy Chinese goods? Why not cut out the middleman? At first this seemed impossible. The dollar was too entrenched. The infrastructure, the contracts, the banking systems, all ran on dollars. But China is patient. They started building alternatives. In 2015, China launched CAPS, the cross-border interbank payment system. Think of it as their answer to SWIFT, the Western-dominated payment network. At first, nobody paid attention. It seemed like a small regional system, but by 2023, CIPS was processing transactions for over 1,300 financial institutions across 100 countries. China also started signing currency swap agreements. These are deals where 2 countries agree to trade in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. China now has swap lines with over 40 countries, worth more than 3.5 trillion yuan. These aren't just symbolic, they're actual infrastructure for a post-dollar world. And here's the key insight. China didn't need to replace the dollar completely. They just needed to create an alternative for oil transactions. If even 20 or 30% of global oil trades shifted from dollars to yuan, that would slash demand for US currency and treasury bonds. The effects would cascade through the entire American economy. Crack number 2. The American shale revolution and the unraveling of the US-Saudi partnership. 2008, oil prices hit $147 per barrel. Everyone assumed the age of cheap energy was over. Peak oil theory suggested we'd hit maximum production and face permanent scarcity. Then came fracking. Horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing unlocked vast reserves of oil and natural gas trapped in shale rock formations across America. North Dakota, Texas, Pennsylvania. Places that weren't major oil producers suddenly boomed. By 2018, America became a net oil exporter for the first time since 1973. Think about what this means. For 45 years, America needed Middle Eastern oil. That dependency was the foundation of our relationship with Saudi Arabia. We protected them because we needed their oil. Now, we don't need it anymore. America produces about 13 million barrels per day. We're the world's largest oil and natural gas producer. Our strategic calculus changed completely. The Saudis noticed. When oil prices crashed in 2014, they called Washington expecting support. They wanted America to pressure other producers to cut supply and raise prices. The Obama administration basically shrugged. American shale producers needed low prices to stay competitive. Saudi interests and American interests had diverged. Then came the murder of Jamal Khashoggi in 2018. A Saudi journalist killed in their consulate in Istanbul. The evidence pointed directly to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. In the old days, Washington might have quietly buried this. Saudi Arabia was too important. But this time, Congress pushed for sanctions. The relationship soured. The Saudis started looking east. If America wouldn't guarantee high oil prices and would publicly criticize the kingdom's internal affairs, maybe China would be a better partner. Beijing doesn't lecture about human rights. They just want oil and are willing to pay. But the third crack, this was the one that changed everything. Ukraine, 2022. February 24th, Russia invades Ukraine. Within days, the West responds with unprecedented sanctions. Russian banks are cut off from SWIFT. Russian oligarchs have their assets frozen. European countries that were buying Russian gas start looking for alternatives. But then came the move that sent shockwaves through every finance ministry on Earth. The US and its allies froze Russia's foreign exchange reserves. $300 billion just locked. Money that Russia had accumulated over decades, held in Western banks and bonds, suddenly inaccessible. Now let's be clear about what this means. Russia had played by the rules. They earned dollars and euros through oil and gas sales. They stored those reserves in the safest places, Western financial institutions and government bonds. And overnight, that wealth became a hostage. For America and Europe, this seemed like a brilliant strategic move. Putin couldn't access his war chest to fund the invasion. But the rest of the world saw something different. They saw that dollar reserves aren't really yours. They're conditional. They can be weaponized. Saudi Arabia paid very close attention. So did China, India, Brazil, South Africa. These countries started asking, what if we're next? What if we have a dispute with Washington? Could our reserves be frozen too? This wasn't paranoia. The US has a long history of using financial sanctions. Iran has been largely cut off from the global financial system for years. Venezuela, North Korea, Syria, the list is long. But freezing a major power's reserves? That was new. That showed the dollar system could be used as a weapon even against large economies. The lesson was crystal clear. Holding assets in dollars means accepting that America has a kill switch on your wealth. For countries that value sovereignty, that's unacceptable. The scramble for alternatives accelerated dramatically. Central banks that had been slowly diversifying their reserves suddenly moved faster. Gold purchases by central banks hit record levels in 2022 and 2023. Countries started negotiating bilateral trade agreements in local currencies. And Saudi Arabia, the linchpin of the entire petrodollar system, began serious talks with China about accepting yuan for oil. 2023. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, begins serious negotiations with China about trading oil for wine. But to understand why this matters so much, we need to understand what China brought to the table and how they'd been preparing for this moment for over a decade. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was the culmination of China's careful, methodical strategy to internationalize the yuan and create an alternative to the dollar-dominated system. Let's start with what China offered Saudi Arabia, because it's far more than just buying oil. First, the Belt and Road Initiative. This is China's trillion-dollar infrastructure project connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa. Saudi Arabia isn't just a participant, they're a crucial hub. China has committed to massive investments in Saudi infrastructure. High-speed rail networks, new ports, industrial cities. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars in long-term development projects. Compare that to what America offers. Military protection, yes. But in terms of economic development, US investment in Saudi Arabia has been declining for years. American companies are focused elsewhere. China, on the other hand, is building the future Saudi economy. Second, technology transfer and industrial cooperation. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 plan aims to diversify away from oil dependency. They want to build tech sectors, renewable energy, manufacturing. China is offering to help build all of that. Chinese companies are partnering with Saudi firms on everything from solar power to artificial intelligence. Third, and this is crucial, China offers something America can't or won't: no political strings attached. Washington lectures Riyadh about human rights, about Yemen, about women's rights. Beijing doesn't care about any of that. They want oil, they'll pay for oil, and they won't criticize how you run your country. For an absolute monarchy trying to modernize while maintaining control, that's attractive. But here's where it gets really interesting: the financial architecture China built to make yuan oil payments work. In 2018, China launched the Shanghai International Energy Exchange. This allows oil futures contracts to be traded in yuan. Before this, all major oil benchmarks, Brent crude, West Texas Intermediate, were priced in dollars. Now there's a yuan-denominated alternative. At first, trading volumes were small, but they've been growing steadily. By 2023, the Shanghai Exchange was trading over 100,000 contracts daily. It's not competing with New York or London yet, but it's real, functioning infrastructure. Then there's the gold connection, and this is brilliant. One of the biggest barriers to countries holding yuan is that China maintains strict capital controls. You can't freely move money in and out of China the way you can with dollars. This makes central banks nervous. What if they need to sell yuan quickly and can't? China's answer: gold convertibility through Shanghai. Here's how it works. Saudi Arabia sells oil to China for yuan. Now the Saudis are holding yuan. They can do 3 things with it. 1. Buy Chinese goods. 2. Invest in Chinese bonds or stocks. 3. Convert it to physical gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. That third option is the key. It gives the yuan a partial commodity backing. It's not a full gold standard, but it's something tangible. And for countries nervous about holding Chinese currency, knowing they can convert it to gold provides comfort. Saudi Arabia has been quietly building up its gold reserves. In 2022 and 2023, Saudi gold holdings increased significantly. They're not announcing it loudly, but the pattern is clear. They're preparing for a world where gold plays a bigger role in international settlements. Now, let's talk about the actual mechanics of Saudi-China oil deals in yuan. The first major yuan-denominated oil purchase happened in March 2023. China National Offshore Oil Corporation bought Saudi crude using yuan. The amount wasn't disclosed, but estimates suggest it was around 600,000 barrels. That might sound small. Saudi Arabia exports about 7 million barrels per day. But it's the precedent that matters. The dam broke. By the end of 2023, estimates suggest 5 to 8% of Saudi oil sales to China were being settled in yuan. That's still a minority, but it's growing. And here's the critical part. Those yuan aren't being converted back to dollars. They're staying in the Chinese financial system. The Saudis are using them to buy Chinese bonds, invest in Belt and Road projects, purchase Chinese technology, and yes, buy gold. This creates a Petroyuan recycling loop, exactly like the Petrodollar recycling that built American financial dominance. Oil money flows to China, gets invested in Chinese assets, and strengthens Beijing's financial system. Other countries are watching. The United Arab Emirates started accepting yuan for oil in 2023. Russia, already under sanctions, significantly increased yuan usage for energy exports. Even Brazil, traditionally in the US sphere of influence, started discussions about yuan oil payments. The snowball is rolling downhill. Each country that accepts yuan makes it easier for the next one. Network effects that built the petrodollar are now working in reverse. China isn't stopping with oil. They're pushing yuan usage across all commodities. Iron ore from Australia, increasingly priced in yuan. Liquefied natural gas, yuan contracts are appearing. Agricultural commodities, same story. The strategy is comprehensive, and the timing is perfect for China. They're the world's largest importer of almost everything: oil, natural gas, coal, iron ore, copper, soybeans. If even a fraction of these trades shift to yuan, it represents trillions of dollars in reduced dollar demand. What does this mean for America? The implications are profound and multifaceted. Let's start with the most immediate impact: demand for US Treasury bonds. This is the foundation of American fiscal policy, and it's under threat. Here's the current situation. The US national debt is $35 trillion. That's trillion with a T. To put that in perspective, that's about $104,000 for every person in America. The annual interest payment on that debt is approaching $1.1 trillion. That's more than we spend on defense. How does America finance this debt? By selling treasury bonds. And who buys them? Foreign countries need dollars for trade, so they buy treasuries as a safe place to store those dollars. It's a convenient arrangement. We get cheap financing, they get a safe asset. But what happens when countries need fewer dollars? They buy fewer treasuries. And when demand falls, prices fall, which means yields rise, which means borrowing becomes more expensive. Let's walk through a scenario. Say 20% of global oil trade shifts from dollars to yuan over the next 5 years. That's not unrealistic given current trends. 20% of roughly 85 million barrels per day at current prices is about $200 billion per year in reduced dollar demand. Now, countries that would have held those dollars in treasuries are instead holding yuan in Chinese bonds. That's $200 billion less demand for US government debt annually. What happens? The Treasury Department still needs to borrow money to finance the deficit, which is running about 1.7 trillion per year. But with less foreign demand, they have to offer higher interest rates to attract buyers. Here's where it gets scary. Every 1% increase in average interest rates adds about 350 billion to annual interest costs. The debt compounds on itself. Higher rates mean higher interest payments, which means more borrowing, which means more debt, which means even higher rates to attract buyers. This is called a sovereign debt spiral, and it's how empires end financially. Not with a bang, but with slowly rising borrowing costs that become unsustainable. Japan went through a version of this in the 1990s. Their economy stagnated for decades. The difference? Japan had a massive domestic savings pool that bought government bonds. America doesn't have that. We depend on foreign buyers. If they step back, we're in trouble. The second major impact, inflation. And this one hits ordinary Americans directly in their wallets. For 50 years, the petrodollar system allowed America to export inflation. Here's how. When the Federal Reserve prints money, normally that would cause domestic inflation. More dollars chasing the same goods equals higher prices. Basic economics. But with the petrodollar system, those dollars flowed overseas to buy oil, then got recycled back into treasuries or invested in American assets. The inflationary pressure was distributed globally. Other countries absorbed some of our monetary expansion. If the Petroyuan reduces dollar demand, those dollars don't flow overseas as much. They stay in the domestic economy. That means money printing translates more directly into inflation. We got a taste of this in 2021 and 2022. The Fed printed trillions during COVID. Inflation hit 9%, the highest in 40 years. Americans saw grocery prices jump 20, 30, even 40% for some items. Gas hit $5 a gallon. Rent spiked. Now imagine that becomes the new normal. Not a temporary spike, but persistent inflation, because the dollar can't find foreign buyers the way it used to. Your savings lose value. Your wage increases can't keep up. The middle class gets squeezed. The third impact, the erosion of sanctions power. This might seem abstract, but it's actually one of the most significant geopolitical consequences. American sanctions work because the dollar is the global reserve currency. When we sanction a country, we're essentially cutting them off from global trade. Banks won't process their transactions because those transactions run through dollar-based systems, and banks don't want to lose access to US markets. We've used this power extensively. Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, Syria, Russia. These sanctions have real bite. They cripple economies. They force countries to negotiate or face economic collapse. But if there's an alternative, if countries can trade in yuan, or in local currencies, or through barter arrangements, sanctions lose their teeth. Russia is the test case. After the Ukraine invasion, the West hit Russia with the most comprehensive sanctions ever imposed on a major economy. Cut off from SWIFT, reserves frozen, exports banned. And yet 2 years later, Russia's economy is still functioning. How? They're trading oil and gas to China and India for yuan and rupees. They're buying goods from China, Turkey, UAE. They've built workarounds. In 2023, Russia actually ran a trade surplus. Their economy contracted, yes, but it didn't collapse the way sanctions architects expected. The Petroyuan gave them a lifeline. Now other countries are watching. If Russia can survive sanctions through alternative payment systems, maybe those sanctions aren't as scary. American leverage diminishes. This affects everything from Middle East policy to Taiwan, from trade negotiations to military alliances. The dollar was our most powerful weapon. That weapon is being dulled. The fourth impact, and this one is slower but equally significant, the restructuring of global capital flows. For decades, money flowed in a predictable pattern. Countries earned dollars through trade, especially oil sales. Those dollars got invested in US stocks, bonds, and real estate. This kept American asset prices high, interest rates low, and made the US the destination for global capital. If the Petroyuan redirects these flows eastward, we're looking at a fundamental reshaping of global finance. Chinese stocks become more attractive as reserve assets. Chinese real estate absorbs more foreign investment. Shanghai and Shenzhen compete with New York as financial centers. American asset prices could face sustained pressure. The stock market has benefited enormously from being the default destination for global wealth. If that changes, valuations could compress significantly. Think about what this means for retirement accounts, pension funds, university endowments. Trillions of dollars in wealth tied to American asset prices. If those prices stagnate or fall because global capital is flowing elsewhere, it's not just Wall Street that suffers. It's every American with a 401k. The fifth and perhaps most psychological impact, the decline of dollar dominance and what it means for American prestige and power. The dollar's role as the global reserve currency has been a source of what economists call exorbitant privilege. We can borrow in our own currency. We don't face exchange rate risk. We can run persistent deficits without crisis. But more than that, it's been a mark of American leadership. The dollar's dominance reflected America's economic might, military power, and institutional credibility. When that dominance fades, so does the perception of American primacy. This has real-world consequences. Countries align with powers they see as ascendant. If China's currency is rising and America's is declining, that shifts diplomatic calculations. Trade agreements, military alliances, international institutions, all of these could gradually reorient toward Beijing. We've seen this movie before. The British pound was the global reserve currency for over a century. London was the centre of global finance. But after World War II, the pound's role declined and the dollar took over. Britain remained important, but it was never the same kind of power. America could be facing a similar transition, not immediate collapse, but gradual decline from unipolar dominance to being one power among several. The Petroyuan is accelerating that transition. We're entering a world where there's no single dominant currency. The dollar is about 58% of global reserves. It was 72% 20 years ago. The euro is second in importance. The yuan is growing fast. Gold? Central banks are buying at record rates. 2024. Saudi Arabia joined BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, now the Saudis too. They're discussing creating their own settlement currency, possibly backed by a basket of commodities and gold. Riyadh is playing smart. They're not completely breaking with the US. Military contracts remain. Some oil is still sold for dollars, but diversification is in full swing. This is insurance. They don't want to depend on one superpower, not America, not China. 3 scenarios. Scenario 1, slow erosion. The petrodollar won't collapse tomorrow, but every year its share will drop. In 10 to 15 years, the dollar is one currency among many, but not the undisputed leader. Scenario 2, crisis catalyst. Reserve currency shifts often happen through crisis, like the pound yielded to the dollar after World War II. A new war? A major economy defaulting? That could accelerate the process dramatically. Scenario 3, digital currencies. China is testing the digital yuan. Other countries are testing their own central bank digital currencies. Maybe the future isn't about physical currencies at all, but digital payment systems where the dollar won't dominate from the start. The Saudi Arabia-China deal isn't just a deal. It's a symbol of the end of an era. 50 years ago, Nixon and the Saudi king created a system that made the dollar king. Now their successors are dismantling this structure brick by brick. What does this mean for you? Watch the dollar exchange rate. It will be more volatile. Watch gold. Central banks are showing where to move. Watch new trade alliances. BRICS is just the beginning. The world is changing. The question isn't whether this will happen. The question is how fast. If this breakdown was useful, hit that like button. It genuinely helps the channel. Subscribe if you want to understand the real economy, not what they show you on the news. Write in the comments. What topic should we break down next? The collapse of the banking system? The future of cryptocurrency? China's economic expansion? See you in the next one.